Hi, my name is Zedric, and the last time I said that out loud in front of my family, they acted like I didn't exist. My wealthy brother walked into court like he already won. His lawyer said, "Effective immediately." My parents just nodded like they rehearsed it. The judge turned to me and asked, "Do you object?" I just said, "Let's wait," for the last person. Then the door opened, and everything they buried started to come back. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you while you were still breathing? I arrived earlier than I needed to. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was hope. I sat in the parking lot for a minute, watching the courthouse doors open and shut. The people walking in had reasons to be there. I wasn't sure I did. The air was brisk, early Carolina spring kind of brisk, just cool enough to remind you winter wasn't done dragging its heels. I checked my tie in the mirror, straightened the collar on the only blazer I owned that hadn't gone out of fashion. Something about walking into a courtroom made you want to look like someone worth listening to. Inside, I walked straight to the registry desk. A young clerk with glossy pink nails glanced at me, then at her screen. Name? Zedric Vale. Clicking. More clicking. A frown. Sorry, sir. I don't see your name on the hearing schedule for today. Are you here as a witness? No, I hesitated. It's a family matter. Inheritance case. She gave a polite shrug, like she'd practiced it 1,000 times. Could be you're just here for moral support then. Moral support. That one landed like a slap, dressed up in Southern charm. Could be, I said quietly, nodding. Thank you. I sat outside the courtroom alone. The clock ticked. My hands stayed folded in my lap, but the muscles in my jaw were locked tight. Moral support. That's what they saw me as now? Not a beneficiary, not a son, just the quiet one who waits in the hallway. Eventually, I heard the click of heels. They always arrived together. Cassian in his tailored suit, our father beside him, jaw square, tie tight, and our mother 2 steps behind, holding her clutch like it might shatter. I stood up. Reflex. Old habits. Maybe I expected a nod. Maybe I still believed blood meant something. Cassian didn't even glance at me. Father adjusted his cufflinks. Mother pretended her phone needed urgent checking. They walked right past me, like I was the janitor. Something in my chest gave way, like a bridge that had been trembling for years finally cracked. Inside the courtroom, the wood paneling gleamed like it had something to prove. Everything smelled like lemon polish and arrogance. Cassian's lawyer, a man named Bryce with the kind of hair that didn't move, opened a thick folder and slid it across the judge's desk like he was serving a meal. "Your Honor," Bryce said smoothly, "as per the updated declaration, this transfer of assets takes effect immediately." The judge barely blinked. He adjusted his glasses, nodded like this was routine. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Vale," he said, "do you object?" For the first time all morning, every face turned toward me. I didn't stand. I didn't clear my throat or raise my voice. I just answered calmly. "I'd like to wait until the last person arrives." The room stiffened. Cassian's lips twitched, half amusement, half irritation. Bryce leaned in to whisper something, but the judge raised a hand, and then the door opened. He walked in like he belonged in that moment. Black suit, silver hair, posture that didn't bend for anyone. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at me. In his hand, a sealed envelope. "For Mr. Zedric Vale," he said, voice like gravel smoothed by experience. I stood, but didn't step forward, just nodded. The judge took the envelope, peeled it open, read silently. His eyebrows crept up. Then he reached for his reading glasses and read it again. "That," he whispered, almost to himself, "can't be." Cassian shifted beside our father, suddenly less sure of his footing. The man in the black suit didn't sit. He just folded his hands and waited. And me? I sat back down, slowly. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to change the ending. The judge looked stunned, but it wasn't just the letter. It was the name printed across the top. He blinked, lowered the page, then looked straight at me like he was seeing me for the first time that morning. "This clause," he said slowly, "was signed 3 weeks prior to the official will, notarized, witnessed, and..." He adjusted his glasses. "It names Zedric Vale as the sole beneficiary of the estate, unless a specific condition was met." Cassian shot up from his seat. "This is absurd. That codicil was never..." The judge raised his palm. "You'll have your chance to respond, Mr. Vale. Sit down." The silence that followed didn't feel victorious. It felt clinical, like the first few seconds after a car crash when your ears are still ringing. Cassian's lawyer leaned over, whispering furiously. Our parents sat stiff and expressionless, like they'd swallowed something they couldn't spit out. And I just sat there, hands clasped, not smiling, not triumphant, just waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge what they did. The judge turned to the man in the black suit. "Mr. Lantham, you're the executor named in this document?" Ezra Lantham stepped forward, calm as ever. "Yes, Your Honor, executor of the prior version of the estate, as dictated by Mr. Howard Vale." My grandfather. Ezra continued. "This clause was removed from the family's firm records without my knowledge or consent." He turned, not to me, but to my parents. "And you knew it existed." My mother's lips parted slightly but didn't speak. My father looked down at his hands. Cassian scoffed and looked away like the whole thing bored him. I closed my eyes for a second, not from relief, from ache. Because it didn't just prove me right. It proved how long they'd been willing to erase me. 6 months ago. It had been raining hard that night. Carolina rain, the kind that hits sideways and soaks you through even under an umbrella. I stood outside the brick building that used to be my grandfather's law office. It had been turned over to another firm after he passed, but some of the same people still worked there. I'd made an appointment. I wanted to look at the old estate files, not challenge anything, just understand. A young woman in reception gave me a polite smile, then tapped a few keys. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vale, but your name isn't listed as someone with viewing privileges." "I'm the grandson," I said gently. She nodded, a bit apologetic. "I understand. But the records were transferred after the estate closed. There's nothing I can show you." I didn't argue, just nodded and walked out into the night. That was the moment. Not when I got excluded from meetings. Not when Cassian started making decisions without looping me in. That moment, standing in the rain, coat soaked, holding on to dignity by a thread, was when I realized they didn't forget me. They removed me. Back in the courtroom, Cassian finally turned to face me fully. He leaned slightly forward, lowered his voice. "You think this changes anything?" I looked him in the eye. "It already has. You just haven't figured out how yet." His jaw tightened. There was that flicker, fear, doubt, or maybe just wounded pride. For once, I wasn't the younger brother hoping to be seen. I was the man holding the one thing he couldn't fake: the truth. Ezra Lantham raised his right hand. I swear the contents of that document are accurate, filed legally, and were overwritten by another version I was not made aware of until this morning. The judge narrowed his eyes. You're saying the family firm concealed this? Ezra didn't answer directly. He just looked at my father. That was enough. The judge exhaled, then scribbled a note. This hearing will be paused, he said, voice tight. We'll reconvene after official document authentication. All current motions are temporarily suspended. He stood, gavel in hand. Court adjourned. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled. I stood last. As I passed my family, no one spoke. My mother stared ahead like she was praying to vanish. My father sat still, one hand clenching his cane. Cassian picked up his phone, scrolling like none of this mattered, but no one looked at me, and I didn't look back. I didn't walk out to prove anything. I walked out because I didn't need to beg anymore. I didn't walk out to prove anything. I walked out because I didn't need to beg anymore. The courthouse doors eased shut behind me with a soft pneumatic sigh, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't flinch at the sound of them closing. I stood there for a moment on the concrete steps, feeling the weight of everything I hadn't said settle across my shoulders like a damp coat. Not heavy, but present. I had no destination in mind, so I drove. It was autopilot that brought me to the Foundation's main office. The parking lot was nearly empty. It was still early, but the light was on in reception. My key card still worked. That surprised me. I stepped into the lobby. The same beige tiles, same faint smell of lavender cleaner, and too old carpeting. But the first thing that caught my eye was the new plaque by the glass wall, bronze, freshly polished, mounted with pride. Founded by Cassian Vale, visionary leader. I blinked. Read it again. Slower this time. No mention of me. Not even in small print. I didn't laugh. Didn't curse. Just let the silence press in. That kind of silence doesn't echo. It absorbs. That plaque wasn't just decoration. It was a rewrite. Bold, public, deliberate. The receptionist behind the desk didn't even glance up. Or maybe she did and just didn't recognize me anymore. That seemed fitting. I left the building without saying a word. 8 months ago, we'd hosted the annual gala at the Marriott downtown. Black tie. Big donors. Cassian had insisted on running the speech this time. Fresh direction, he'd said. I showed up in the same tux I'd worn the last 3 years. I never asked for a new one. The table card with my name had been crossed out and scribbled over with another name in thick marker. An usher gestured me to a different seat, back near the kitchen entrance, next to the ice bucket cart. I told myself it was a mistake, one of those last-minute things. But then the speech started. Cassian stood beneath a cascade of spotlight and applause. "The Vale Foundation," he boomed, "has always stood for forward thinking, for strength, leadership, vision." He spoke for 11 minutes, quoted our grandfather once, referenced our father, named himself 5 times. He didn't say my name once. When he raised his glass to toast, I didn't lift mine. And as the crowd applauded again, my mother passed by my table, didn't even stop walking, and said, "You looked tired up there." I hadn't been on stage. She knew that. Back in my car, I sat quietly, engine off, hands on the wheel like I'd forgotten how to let go. The ping from my phone startled me. A message from Kaya. She'd left the foundation 2 weeks earlier. No fanfare, no goodbye. Just vanished from the internal directory. There was an attachment, screenshots, scanned memos, internal emails. The subject line read, Public Brand Alignment, Removal of Redundant Founders Mentions, from Cassian. We can't afford legacy clutter in messaging. The story must be clean, forward-facing, no confusion. I scrolled through more. A digital brochure draft, with my bio section red-lined and marked Delete. A website wireframe, my photo replaced by a stock image of a handshake. The last note was from Kaya herself. Short. No commentary. Just one line beneath it all. I thought you should know. I sat there a long while, didn't respond, didn't call. What would I even say? I opened the envelope Ezra Lantham had given me that morning, pulled the codicil out again, ran my finger over my grandfather's signature. The pen had pressed deeply into the page, like the old man had signed it with more force than necessary. He hadn't erased me. They did, and they were proud of it. I didn't need them to remember me. I needed to remember who I was before they told the world I wasn't there. So I followed the only man in that courtroom who hadn't looked at me like I was a ghost. Ezra Lantham didn't say much as we left the courthouse. He just gestured toward his car, and I got in. No questions, no promises, just movement. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It felt like a held breath, like both of us knew something bigger than us had already started unraveling. The drive didn't take long. Maybe 15 minutes through the older part of town, past the courthouse district into a strip of aging office buildings and shuttered cafes. We pulled into a narrow lot tucked behind a faded sign. Sterling Records, Legal Archive. Inside, it was cooler than I expected. Not cold like air conditioning. Cold like concrete. Like old secrets. Ezra walked ahead of me, past a desk where no one sat, through a hallway that smelled faintly of dust and toner. He stopped in front of a heavy gray door and typed in a code. "This room isn't official company space," he said, voice low. "It was your grandfather's, kept off the books." He opened the door. No dramatic lighting, just shelves, file boxes, an old copier in the corner. A fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed faintly. Ezra walked to one of the shelves, pulled a manila folder from a stack, and held it out. "Your grandfather gave me permission to release this, only if the board ever acted in bad faith." I didn't reach for it immediately. I looked at him instead, this man who'd been so silent in court. Yet somehow, everything about him said, "I know more than I'm letting on." He nodded once, just once. So I took it. The folder wasn't thick, just 3 pages, neatly paper-clipped. The top one was a codicil, signed, notarized, dated 3 weeks before the official will. My name sat squarely in the first paragraph, not at the bottom, not as a footnote. I read it once, then again, slower. "Any restructuring of this estate shall be deemed invalid if obtained through duress, influence, or without informed, independent legal counsel. Full authority remains with Zedric Vale unless all successor signatures are verified, independent, and witnessed." I lowered the page. Cassian's filing hadn't met that condition. It had no lawyer's name, no third-party witness, just a notary and a timestamp. "They bypassed the clause," I said quietly. "They dismissed the clause," Ezra corrected. "Big difference." I looked up. "You knew this was coming?" Ezra shook his head. "I knew the way your grandfather thought. He didn't trust the living to keep quiet." He stepped back and crossed his arms, watching me. I remembered the last time I saw my grandfather alive. We were sitting at his old oak table, It was after dinner. No fanfare, no guests. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, poured me water. He looked at me long before speaking. "When men rewrite history," he said, "don't waste your breath arguing. Just keep the originals." At the time, I laughed, thought it was another one of his many cryptic, whiskey-soaked gems. He didn't explain further, just slid the glass toward me and asked if I was still playing piano. I wasn't. Now the memory stung, not because of what he said, but because I hadn't listened hard enough. The originals. He meant this. I flipped to the second page in the folder, a scanned document, a timestamp dated exactly 1 month before the will was read. The header was from the Foundation's board. It showed my name listed under founding members. A red strikeout cut straight through it. A new version showed only Cassian. The ink hadn't even dried on my grandfather's grave, and they were already rewriting the masthead. I closed the folder slowly. My hands didn't shake, not this time. Outside, the day had shifted. The light was softer, fading toward late afternoon. I thanked Ezra. He just gave me a thin smile. "You'll want to keep that close," he said. "Not just the document, the knowing." I nodded and walked back to my car. I sat there for a long time, didn't start the engine, just stared at the folder. Then I reached into my glove box, pulled out a portable scanner, and copied every page into a fresh folder on a blank thumb drive. I labeled it Contingency. I tucked the drive under the lining of my briefcase, then slid the physical documents into a fireproof envelope and locked it in the trunk. As I sat behind the wheel again, the same thought kept returning. Not bitter, not angry. Just clear. They think I'm gone. Let them. I didn't need revenge. Not yet. But I needed them to keep underestimating me. Let them play the game. I was just learning the rules. I didn't knock. I never used to have to. The front door of the estate used to creak when you opened it. My grandfather never wanted it oiled. Said doors should announce arrivals. But today, it slid open without a sound. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender polish and something colder, like absence pretending to be order. The doorman looked up from his stool, hesitated like he recognized me, then decided against it. "Sir," he said. No name, no nod. I stepped in, and everything felt misaligned. The hallway still curved the same way, but the photographs lining it were new, clean, expensive frames. All of them featured Cassian at charity galas, ribbon cuttings, holding a microphone like it was his birthright. I paused outside what used to be my grandfather's study. The door was ajar. Inside, the scent hit me first. Aged oak replaced by the tang of wine and polished marble. Where the bookshelf once stood, there was now a glass wine rack. Bottles with names I couldn't pronounce lined up like trophies. "They didn't renovate," I murmured. "They erased." From the hallway, I heard my mother's voice. "He's here." Not surprised, not welcoming, just acknowledging a disruption. Dinner was already set. A table that once seated 10 now seated 6, with Cassian and Mother on either end. I was ushered to a place near the edge, like a guest at a wedding who didn't RSVP. "Lovely tie," my mother said without looking up. I wasn't wearing one. I nodded anyway. Cassian poured himself a drink, deep red. Then he reached for the second bottle, the one he knew I was allergic to, and poured it into my glass without asking. I pushed it aside. "I'll stick to water." He smiled thinly. "Still sensitive, huh?" Dinner went on like that. Words sharpened just enough to cut, never deep enough to bleed. "We're so glad you're doing well," my mother said, her fork scraping porcelain. "It suits you, being away." I said nothing. I was done reacting. After the plates were cleared, I excused myself and walked the hallway again. The new photos were curated like a museum, except I wasn't part of the exhibit. Then I saw it. A framed image from the Foundation's launch. I remembered that night. I stood next to my grandfather, hand on his shoulder. But here, my spot was empty. A woman stood in my place. Cassian's assistant. The cropping was seamless, like I had never been there. I took a photo of the photo, pocketed it. Back at the table, Cassian was swirling his wine. He looked up as I sat down. "You know, redundancy clauses, they never hold. Garbage law, really." I didn't blink, didn't ask what he meant, because redundancy clause wasn't in any public version of the will. He knew. They all did. After coffee, I stood to leave. My mother didn't rise. Cassian didn't speak. But someone else did. A soft hand touched my elbow. Marla, one of the staff who had worked here since I was a boy. "There's something for you," she whispered. She pressed a sealed envelope into my palm and walked away. In the car, I waited until I was around the corner before opening it. Inside was a single receipt, dated 2 days after the funeral. Surveillance services, vault access clearance, request to wipe footage, signed by Cassian. They hadn't just removed me from the story. They rewrote it, preemptively. I put the receipt in the same folder I now carried everywhere, labeled it contingency. Then I drove away. They thought the meeting ended when I stood up. It didn't. It started when I walked out. I didn't slam the door when I got home. I didn't drop my keys into the bowl or even take my shoes off right away. I just stood in the entryway of my apartment, staring at the envelope in my hand like it might blink first. It wasn't heavy, just a few printed pages, neat and quiet inside a thin manila shell. But it carried more weight than any accusation I could have spoken in that dining room. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one I used to eat ramen at when the job offers dried up and Cassian said, "You should have picked a real major." Same chair, same spot. Only this time, I wasn't the one clinging to dignity. The receipt was dated exactly 1 day after the funeral. A simple transaction. Data access and deletion, listed under Cassian's name. I ran my finger over the printed timestamp, 3:12 a.m. That vault was supposed to remain sealed until the reading of the will. He broke in before the ink on the eulogy dried. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to confirm it. So I picked up the phone and called Ezra. He picked up after the first ring. "You're reading it," he said. "I need to know if this is what I think it is," I replied. He didn't ask me to elaborate. "It means someone opened the vault illegally, and I know who signed the logbook." A pause. "And I never shredded your grandfather's backup." The line went silent for a breath. Then I said, "That's what I needed." I didn't go to bed. Instead, I pulled out the older documents Ezra had given me and laid them side by side with the receipt. My desk became a battlefield. Ink against intention, timestamps against lies. The deletion log matched the server time. The access window overlapped exactly with a known entry code. Cassian's old passphrase still embedded in the metadata. Sloppy. Entitled. And then something else. Buried in a folder labeled Partnership Legacy was a reference to Arctura Holdings. I remembered the name vaguely, something my grandfather used for shell investments when he didn't want our last name attached. I followed the trail, checking old business filings. My name was still listed as a 51% stakeholder under the original trust routing. It had never been legally rescinded. Cassian didn't rewrite history. He tried to forge over it. I didn't call him. I didn't send a letter. I didn't march back into that house with the proof in my hand. Instead, I printed the documents, time-stamped them, signed a fresh cover sheet, and walked into the law firm at 7:58 the next morning. The receptionist asked if I had an appointment. "No," I said, "but I'm here for your compliance officer." She blinked, looked down at her screen. "And you are?" "Just make sure this ends up in their 9 a.m. inbox." I handed her the black envelope. It wasn't marked urgent. There was no confrontation, just a cover page that read, "Per Regulatory Clause 8C, failure to disclose material interest constitutes grounds for full reversion." I walked out without looking back. The morning sun felt different, not warm, just bright enough to sting. I went home and watered the snake plant that hadn't bloomed in months. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I read the same paragraph in a paperback 5 times and couldn't tell you what it said. At 9:01 a.m., my phone buzzed. Ezra. "They're calling an emergency board meeting." Me. "Good. I'm not attending." I folded the blanket on the couch and laid down. Not because I was tired, but because for the first time in years, my body believed me when I said, "It's handled." And I let the quiet finally do its job. I walked into the boardroom before anyone else. The lights were already on, casting a washed-out glow over the long, polished table like some medieval council prepping for judgment. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy surface, sharper, quieter, but not uncertain anymore. Cassian and Mother were already seated when I arrived, flanked by 2 lawyers whose faces were as rigid as their starched collars. They glanced up, measured me, then looked away as though I might evaporate if examined too closely. I didn't sit right away. I let them simmer in their own discomfort a while. Finally, I took the chair at the opposite end of the table. The room was silent for a beat that felt like a heartbeat caught in a locked chest. Cassian cleared his throat. "We've confirmed the transfer was clean. The matter's over." I folded my hands in front of me, breathing calmly, deliberately. "Is it?" That made him blink. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the first folder. Gray cardstock, unremarkable, but each sheet inside was a stitch in a tapestry they thought buried. I laid it on the table and, finger by finger, slid the first document toward the center. "Vault access logs," I said. "Time-stamped entries showing unauthorized entry 18 hours before the will was read. Signed with your access code." I didn't look at him. I let the evidence speak first. Next came the deletion receipts, logs showing footage wiped, metadata altered, everything tied back to that one entry. Cassian's jaw tightened as the reality settled into the room like a winter cold. The second folder was dark blue, different, authoritative. I placed it beside the first. "This," I said, "is a notarized power of attorney dated 6 months before the restructuring. It names me as a principal stakeholder, independent counsel, verified, not a notary public who might be hoodwinked." I lifted the top paper and let the ink breathe its truth across the table. Cassian looked down at the documents, then at his lawyers, then back at me. His expression wasn't rage. It was confusion, an unraveling sense that all his certainty had been built on sand. The room was stretching, folding in on itself. like someone had unstitched the lining of a well-made coat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I just continued, calm as someone reading the weather aloud. The judge issued an emergency injunction. You know this. The regulatory body has already been notified. The audit is underway. I paused, just a breath. You didn't just violate ethics, you voided the entire trust migration. Someone cleared their throat near the corner of the room, and all heads turned, less a disruption than a seismic shift. The man stood, tall, gray suit, presence quiet, but compelling. I recognized him from the briefing call Ezra set up a week ago, the representative from the Global Financial Authority. This meeting is being recorded, he said, voice even, serious. I am here on behalf of the Regulatory Oversight Panel. Effective immediately, all holdings under the disputed entities are frozen pending formal investigation. No transfer, acquisition, or financial movement may occur without explicit approval. Cassian's face went slack, like the oxygen had been slowly siphoned from the room. My mother clasped her hands in front of her mouth, eyes wide. She didn't say anything, but her silence said enough. I exhaled once, a slow, deliberate exhale, like a lid lifting off boiling tea. You called this meeting to quiet the noise, I said without turning toward Cassian. I brought what ends the story. No more whispers, no more shady omissions. The truth was sitting in the middle of that table, dry and undeniable. The gray-suited observer folded his hands, eyes forward, like he'd seen worse and better both. Behind him, lawyers whispered into phones and glanced at watches. I stood, didn't look at Cassian, didn't make eye contact with my mother. Their lack of acknowledgement wasn't bitterness anymore. It was clarity. I walked out. The elevator doors clicked closed behind me, and I watched the mission statement plaque for the foundation flicker past on the wall's reflection, words about compassion and legacy, words now under audit and scrutiny. I sent a text to Ezra. It's done. The rest is paperwork. His reply came a moment later. No. That was legacy. I breathed once, letting it settle, small and quiet, but firm. I had spoken, and the truth had answered back. The ballroom glowed under chandeliers that cost more than I'd made in my first 5 years at the foundation. Waiters moved like clockwork. Champagne flutes clinked. A string quartet played something polite and forgettable. Cassian was already at the podium, shaking hands, bowing just enough to flatter donors, and posing beneath the Veil Foundation crest. I stood near the back wall, invisible by design. Tucks pressed, tie straight, face unreadable. I'd been here before, but never like this. Cassian tapped the mic twice. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this year's renewal gala. We've made enormous strides under new leadership, and tonight is about honoring the future without forgetting the past. His smile flickered toward me for a split second. Our tribute video will begin shortly. I didn't move, just raised my hand slightly, the signal Ezra and I had agreed on. Somewhere in the control booth, tucked above the chandeliers, a tech received the cue. My phone buzzed once. It's live. The lights dimmed. The big screen behind the podium lit up. A slow piano score began, familiar images playing, Cassian shaking hands with a governor, ribbon cuttings, scholarship students in foundation hoodies. Then the screen blinked. The music cut out. A black screen, white text. You were never supposed to see this. Gasps rippled. Some assumed it was a technical error. Then my voice filled the room. When a legacy is stolen, it doesn't vanish. It hides in receipts, in signatures, in shadows, until someone brings it into the light. The screen shifted. A document appeared. Cassian's early vault access receipt, time-stamped 18 hours before the official will reading. Then another. His forged authorization to transfer control of the Foundation. Over it, my voice. Fraud isn't just a crime. It's a confession, signed in silence. At the front, Cassian froze. He stepped forward like he might speak, but the footage kept rolling. Security cam stills, ledger scans, internal memos, and then an image of the red folder. The same one he had mocked me for carrying into the courtroom weeks ago. It now sat on the podium beside him, placed there quietly when no one was looking. He reached for it. I was already halfway down the aisle. He tried to cut the mic. Too late. The trust was never legally reassigned, my voice continued. And every asset moved under its umbrella is now under federal review. People turned to look at each other. The whispers grew teeth. A woman from the Financial Ethics Board stood up silently from her table near the center. Her badge glinted just enough to be seen. Cassian's voice cracked. This is staged. I stepped onto the stage. That folder contains the original succession clause, Cassian, with my grandfather's seal. You accessed the vault early, had documents scrubbed, altered. That red folder, it's not a prop. It's a trigger. He lunged. Security intercepted him before he reached me. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. My mother sat 2 rows from the front, hands clasped, lips pale. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. I turned to the mic one last time. This isn't vengeance. This is the record correcting itself. You spent a year trying to write me out, but legacies don't erase that easily. I didn't wait for applause. There wouldn't be any. Just silence. I stepped down, walked past the tables that once ignored me, past the people who once nodded out of politeness and distance. At the door, a trustee caught my arm. Is it true? All of it? I didn't answer. Truth didn't need explaining anymore. Back in the elevator, I loosened my tie and watched the floor number climb. My phone buzzed again. Ezra's name lit the screen. It's done, I texted. He replied within seconds. No, that was legacy. 3 days had passed since the gala, but the echoes hadn't settled. I stood outside the office my father once called his command center. The security badge still worked. No one had bothered to revoke it. Maybe they assumed I wouldn't come back. The door creaked open, not dramatically, just tired, like it had been closed too long. Inside, the desk was pristine, not with care, but abandonment. Dust clung to the arms of the leather chair. A stack of unopened mail lay fanned on the side table like no one dared touch it since the night it all came down. I didn't sit. I moved slowly, fingertips grazing the bookshelves, the ledgers, the marble frame on the wall with the family beach photo. My father had it cropped and mounted years ago. Cassian in the center, flanked by our parents. My image was there too. Barely. My left arm made the corner, a sliver of shoulder, the suggestion of someone once present. I didn't feel bitter, just finished. They built a story without me, I murmured, and it still collapsed. I took that photo off the wall, not to keep it, but because it didn't belong here anymore. Later that afternoon, I met Ezra at the park. No fanfare, no briefcases, just 2 men on a bench watching old oaks bend in the wind. The lake ahead was still, the surface holding every branch's reflection like glass. It's quiet now, I said, Ezra didn't look at me. Quiet isn't empty. We sat that way for a while, without rushing the silence. He didn't offer closure or wisdom or reassurance, just presence. That was enough. By the time I got home, the light had shifted. The apartment felt less like a place I retreated to and more like a place I had chosen. I laid the red folder, yes, that same one, on the shelf above my desk. It was closed now. Not because it wasn't important, but because it had already spoken. I opened it one last time. Between regulatory affidavits and witness statements, a yellowed recipe card had slipped inside, my mother's handwriting, her buttermilk cornbread. I ran my thumb across the ink. Funny, I hadn't seen her hand in years, yet I knew instantly it was hers. A part of me chuckled softly. Not everything was fake. Not everything was war. I didn't know if she'd meant to tuck that in, or if it had been collateral from some drawer they emptied too quickly. But I kept it. Not for the recipe, but for what it reminded me of. Before it all broke, there were moments. Small ones. Real ones. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't need her silence again. That evening, I returned to the courthouse, not for another hearing, but to file a document. I stepped into the clerk's office, handed it over, and declined the copy. The form removed my name from any public leadership within the Vail Foundation. Instead, I listed a new entity, a private trust that would operate under a different name, untraceable unless someone knew where to look. I didn't want a statue. I wanted seed grants for kids like me, quiet, overlooked, uninvited. Back on the courthouse steps, I paused. No cameras, no applause, no victory speeches. Just me and the wind. They had tried to erase me from the history they scripted, but all they managed to do was prove how afraid they were of the part I hadn't played yet. That was the real inheritance. I took the long way home. Later that night, in my small kitchen, I tucked the recipe card into a drawer beside my passport, a reminder of roots and roads. Before turning in, I stood at the window. The city blinked back at me, busy, loud, full of lives I'd never know. But somewhere out there, someone else might be trying to stay quiet to keep the peace. And maybe tonight, they'd hear this story. Because this wasn't vengeance. This was truth, made visible. And it was final.